Hi, I'm Adam and welcome once again to South Wales Ghost Watch. Here we are again. We've got a very special guest on our show today. He's been on the show before, Lee Richards, author of UFO Wales, and regular guest Martin as well.
Hi.
Okay, and today we're going to be talking about Doomsday, and we're also going to be talking about phone calls from the dead. I'll start us off with Doomsday, and this question is aimed at Martin. Martin, does Doomsday mean the end of the world as such?
No. The problem we've got with trying to define words like doomsday is it comes very much from a Christian idea that the world is going to be ended, that the world is going to suddenly be judged and found wanting. If you actually look back in ancient history, you find that there is no formal doomsday as such, where the world ends. What you actually get is the idea that humanity, that the world goes in cycles. It comes down to a confusion between the idea that time goes on forever and that time is limited. And I think that you have to be very, very careful how you start predicting the end of the world. After all, it's the end of the world for somebody, somewhere, every second of the day. The issue is that doomsday is something that has crept into Western culture rather than a more Eastern or more ancient idea.
Okay, right. Okay, so how is humanity affected by doomsday?
Well, you're affected by doomsday depending on the sort of beliefs that you're brought up with. If you've got the idea that you have very strict parents, or the idea that you have done something wrong, you effectively begin to believe that you're going to be judged. And the idea of a doomsday as such comes psychologically from having people who make moral judgments on us, and also the idea that there is something fundamentally wrong with the world, that has always been something wrong with the world and that always will be. It's the question of how we live our lives. Now, if you go back to the Indian model of the world, the gods and the goddesses rather pleasantly made love for many millions of years and created new worlds and will continue to make new worlds. In Egyptian mythology, the world was made out of chaos and will always be here. So the idea of doomsday and judgment is something that is very limited, very fixed, and there have been so many doomsdays. There was the idea that in the year 1000 AD the world was going to end. It didn't. There will probably be ideas that the world will end in the year 10,000. There was concern the world was going to end in the year 2000 AD. These ideas just go on and on and on. The calendar is an invention of humans. Technically, December the 21st has already passed, because the old Gregorian calendar that was abolished in the 17th century means that we were 12 days out, 20 days out. So technically, the world, if the Mayans are right, which existed before the Gregorian calendar was brought up to date, that's what's happened.
Okay. Lee, what sort of disasters or events could cause the world to end, do you think?
I think just to elaborate on Martin's point, when we talk about the world, I mean, people sometimes have to make the distinction, I think, between the world ending and, say, humanity ending. There's a difference, because usually when we talk about the world ending, we really mean humanity. Now, obviously, we know historically from the historical records and from future projections that, I mean, a large body will collide with the Earth at some point in the not too distant future. I think there's a near-Earth collision expected in about 50 years or something. These periodically crop up. I mean, it's quite possible a comet or asteroid could come out of literally nowhere.
Yeah.
And obviously, if it's large enough, and the size usually given is, say, 10 kilometers across or something, that would quite possibly wipe out most of humankind. And there are other phenomena. I mean, supervolcanoes could,
yes,
and create what's called a nuclear winter, and tsunamis. Obviously, there's the possibility of a worldwide, nuclear war, which is always a possibility.
Holocaust.
I think in the next 100 years, there's the possibility something like that could happen. Any of those events would probably quite possibly wipe out the human race. In terms of the world ending, of course, that's something a bit more profound, because you're talking about, the Earth ceasing to have any real meaningful meaningful life of any kind. And that, you know, for that to happen, you're probably looking at something, a profound disaster in the universe. I mean, a collision with a massive, you know, object, which has happened in Earth's past, because apparently that's what created the moon.
Yes.
Was that, you know, some massive object collided with you.
Or maybe the dinosaurs became extinct as well.
That's right, and there's some evidence that that may have happened, for instance, to Mars in the past. So, you know, I think we need to distinguish between the end of the world or the end of humanity, because humanity could end, there could be a disaster which would mean humanity would basically be wiped out or sent back to the Stone Age, but life would go on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And the reality is some species would flourish,
Yes.
if we were to. I mean, that's a fact, you know, and or we would be replaced by, you know, another dominant species. You know, we are large, you know, whatever some fundamentalist Christians might believe, we are here really because of you know, an asteroid that, you know, collided with the Earth 70 million years ago, wiped out the dominant species at the time. Not immediate apparently, it was more prolonged than that. But again, most people don't realise that about 235 million years ago, there was an even bigger disaster, which obliterated something like 90% of all living organisms on the Earth.
Yeah.
So, you know, we would be replaced by another dominant species. So, as I say, just to come back, in terms of the end of the world, you're talking about something more profound. But I mean, I think astronomers have pointed out that at some point in the future, this world will end as a body, because you know, the sun is going to expand.
Yes.
And also apparently there's some speculation that the universe itself may end in theory at some dim and distant point in the future.
Yeah.
I hope I've answered your question.
That's right. I think the interesting point that Carl Sagan, who was a very distinguished cosmologist, wrote a book called The Dragons of Eden. And he speculated, I mean, if you'd go back to the time that our ancestors were there, the time of the dinosaurs, we were small creatures, and the dinosaurs were gigantic and dominated. The raptors were beginning to hunt collectively in groups, and Sagan actually speculated that had the dinosaurs survived, by now they would have reached a small size as us, and they would probably be as aware. And obviously, if humanity was wiped out, then obviously nature might try again with the insects or the rats.
Yeah,
So there is an idea, and in terms of belief of intelligence and design and culture, there is an old Indian legend that when the gods bugger it up, they try again with the next species. So I sometimes wonder if when we talk about the end of the world, we talk about this idea in terms of loss of a particular dominant species.
Sorry, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
On the issue of the paranormal,
Yes.
do you find, Martin, because I find this, the end of the world psychology is a bit of a problem because it tends to intrude, I mean, you know, I find this a particular psychology, negative psychology of the end of the world, you know, which, yes, we know it will end at some point, but I find if you've got an interest in the paranormal, I don't know if you find this, Martin, or yourself, Adam, but you get it gets roped in. I mean, because when I wrote my book, people have said, oh, I enjoyed your book, you know, but I don't mention 2012 or anything like that in it, or the Mayans, but people automatically assume I subscribe to the you know, the Mayan Codex, I think it's called, you know, their prediction the world, or alleged prediction the world would end on the 21st of December, which they actually didn't actually say apparently, always misconstrued. But I find it's a bit of an obstacle, you know. It's as if people think that we all think the world will end, you know, at a certain point, you know, say a definite date.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think you're right, Lee. I think that sometimes people are very uncritical in parapsychological research. I'm not talking about the group here, but sometimes people take on board an absolute load of nonsense.
yeah,
There is no evidence that the world will end.
No, there's not.
There-
It's speculation.
And one could always speculate that a world ending, or if you like, a change of consciousness, to some way is a way of the past dying off.
is that what the Mayans meant? I mean, I know.
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, you can predict that in a number of ways. I mean, you can look at the Mayan idea that a new era is about to dawn.
Right.
And if you look at the famous Christian idea in the Day of Judgment and the return of the devil rides out and all the Antichrist rises up.
Yeah.
There have been so many Antichrists and ends of the world. That actual text, the Book of Revelation, was written by John of Patmos, and it attests to a time when the Emperor Nero was persecuting a very early Christian church. And the Council of Nicaea placed it in the Bible, thinking that the Book of Revelation was written by the Apostle John, whereas it was written by John of Patmos. And that's one more of those shocking things that people don't know.
What about these people who've, mothership, the people who mothershipped into Nostradamus and other people allegedly given dates, and I think there's one comment about when there's a certain number of times it all means. What about all that? Because there's quite a,
Yeah. I mean, for example, looking at the prophecy of Saint Malachi about the number of popes and the end of the church, they equate it with the end of the world.
Right.
I'm not so sure that the end of organised religion would actually mean the end of the world. It might actually mean its saving.
Yes, religion's very dangerous, isn't it? Yeah,
that's organised. And it is interesting that at times of economic crisis, at times when terrible things are going on, people tend to look more for the ending of the world. Whereas in terms of when people are happy and content, it fades again. There's a very interesting index on the internet called the Tribulation Index, which is an invention of some evangelical Christians in the far south of America, who believe that this indicates when the time towards the end of the world is coming. Unfortunately, the Tribulation Index rises with economic crises and at times of terrorism. Normally when people feel insecure, that's the sort of thing that happens. People begin to speculate the end of the world when their view is being pushed aside and when they're in trouble. It's very difficult to separate out your own view of the ending of the world by saying the ending of the world is the way I see it is coming, and that is then transported to apply in that way.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, for a person who's unhappy in their life as well, I mean, for their own state of mind, the end of the world could be them, I don't know, committing suicide or something, you know.
Precisely.
If they're depressed, for them, that's their end of the world.
For Hitler, I mean, for now it sees the collapse of the Third Reich was the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, looking at that influence on Hitler of the end of the world, he was very much influenced by the old Norse legends of the day of Ragnarok, when the world would end, and the world would end in fire. That image of the world ending was terribly influential on the destruction of the world. And there were rumours that President Reagan, was very much interested in end time theology, and that the war would come in the Middle East. And can you imagine having an American president who actually believed the world was coming to an end? How that would affect foreign policy. So you see how complicated it is, this sort of ending of the world scenario.
Is it something common to Western culture?
It's very common to Western culture. To the Eastern mind, the world goes on and on and on. And if you think about it, it comes down to the division between Aristotle and Plato. Plato believed in an end time.
Yes.
Aristotle said the world would go on forever. That's why Plato was far more acceptable to the Christian church, and why Aristotle was actually more hidden. So the idea of world without end, I rather like the Hindu idea, as I said earlier, that the gods and goddesses made love for thousands of years. I think that's a much better way to spend eternity myself than worrying about the end of the world.
Enjoying the pleasures of lovemaking, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so how can philosophers and scientists draw conclusions on the fate of our world and humanity?
Do you want to say anything on that, Leo, or do you want to a bit?
Well, scientists, obviously, I mean, we know that, for instance, environmentally, we're using the Earth probably and use its resources at a more rapid rate that is sustainable.
Yes.
And there's no sign, to that ending. So obviously, that's what we've got in climate change happening. Which is, I mean, to us, climate change might just mean a particularly wet summer or very severe winter. For some people on the Earth, it means they drown because sea levels are rising.
Yeah.
Or it means their crops are wiped out, so they starve to death. you know, we don't really hear a lot about that. So I think from a perhaps Martin will speak on the philosophical angle, but from the scientific aspect, I think it's the fact that, you know, the Earth has finite resources, and you know, what's worrying is obviously, I mean, we're developed here, you know, say we're developed in Europe and North America and other places. These other parts of the world are entitled to be developed, you know, China, parts of Africa, and if they want to reach the same type of, go along the same path as we have, that means they're going to exploit the resources even more, which will have, you know, even more profound consequences, you know, for life on Earth, because of the impact that will have on the environment.
Yeah, like if all our trees got just wiped out, we'd have no oxygen.
Absolutely.
That kind of thing.
And I think in terms of, say, although it's not strictly a scientific aspect, the growth of the arms trade, I mean, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, I mean, the worry is, I know people say, oh, they've kept the peace. It's a bit of a lie, because there have been constant wars all over the world for the last 50 years, in which millions of people have died, actually. But all that has to happen is one rogue state or a computer error. I mean, at the moment, the Americans are experimenting with drone weaponry, and it's possible in the future you might have nuclear weapons controlled by computers. You know, let's say there's a computer error or something. That's almost happened. So I think, you know, there are a number of important things there which you know, certainly scientists will look at.
But if you look at, say, the rise of environmentalism, if you look at the idea of the Gaia hypothesis of James Lovelock, the idea is that the world is a living organism,
Yes.
and that we have enough resources for it to work perfectly well. But humanity keeps gobbling up our resources at an appalling rate. Now, spiritually, the rise of interest in parapsychology and the rise of more New Age religions and the return of neo-paganism and the rise of other things like that have said we are stewards of this world. The original translation in the Hebrew, which was in the book of Genesis, was that God made humans stewards and not masters. And the idea of a world coming to an end, remember the old book of the book of Genesis talks about the knowledge of good and evil. The idea of looking after the world is probably the more potent image here, rather than a version that the world as such will come to an end. The choice of life or death depends with us. So the rise of the interest in values like parapsychology, ecology, the idea of spirituality is a kickback against the world which sees nature just as a thing to be used. So world endings really depend on the dark side of humans. If we think of films like the Terminator films, it's where there's that theme of man's technology rises up against him and iRobot. All these concerns, however scientific, however spiritual, however imaginary, all show the fascination with Western society of the ending of the world. Now the question is how we stop that. And what's to be encouraged is this looking in values beyond our lifetime. The idea that we do not inherit the world from our parents. We act in stewardship of it for our children. The fact that people might not care about what happens after their death would be very different if there was a mass world belief that they kept coming back and facing up to it. The idea of a day of judgment is also a bit of a scary thing as well. It's a good way of controlling the masses. But what's to be punished in one society and what's good and what's evil in another varies dramatically. The golden rule above all, do as you would wish to be treated. That's how we need to look after this world. And that idea prevents the argument of a world ending.
Just to say, I found that people with a belief in the paranormal do seem to have a concern for the welfare of the earth and humanity, living things. They do, from my experience.
Yes.
And I know, Martin, in your previous capacity as president of the West Green Party, when you invite me to some of your meetings and I meet people, they would obviously be concerned about the environment and and animal welfare, and that we don't destroy the earth through what we do. But they also had conversely seem to have an interest in paranormal beliefs as well.
Yes.
I think there's a link there
There's
between maybe interest in the paranormal and perhaps wanting the best for the world, to preserve the world, and wanting the best for humankind,
Yeah. I mean, in America, some of the Tea Party people actually doubt climate change.
Yeah.
Because they believe that
That's true.
because the world cannot come to when the last tree falls, Jesus will return.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous belief.
Terrible.
And that has serious implications.
Yeah.
So, we have to see all these views fitting into the context of the world in which we live. And the rise of interest in things like this are fascinating, because they show that the fight back is beginning, that people want other values.
In the film, I mean, going off the point, the Dead Zone,
Yes.
isn't it a
Yes.
Christian president, but he wants to end the world? Isn't
Yes,
that?
that's right.
And the character
And the
stops
character
being
has to make a
president.
choice. Yes, that's right.
But he believes in
Yes.
he sees it as his mission to bring about the end of the world,
Yes.
predicted in Revelations or
Yes.
whatever.
And I say Revelations is a book that is open to all sorts of interpretations.
Okay, so how do religions and cults view doomsday? Different
Religions and cults largely view doomsday as a means of control. Cults need dominant figures. They also need dominant views, dominant ideologies to influence and control people. So by telling people that the world will end if wickedness continues, and what you happen to be doing now is wicked, leads to control. Organised religion as such talks about judgment, but the world judges somebody every day. The things that are wrong are not sharing resources, are not respecting difference, not supporting equality. And any organisation that is not interested in making us all the best we possibly can be and encouraging us to be the best we can be is going to run into trouble. So they seek terrible endings as a means of control.
Isn't it true as well, in terms of paranormal link? For instance, with UFOs,
Yes.
with UFO, where there have been encounters with actual beings, extraterrestrial beings, people have often been given messages that, and shown images that unless humanity changes its ways, this is what happened. And certainly for a period, in the 50s, 60s and 70s, that was quite common. It's happened in Wales. And they've also been sightings of supposed angels and things where these angels are giving predictions, similar type, of if humankind doesn't change its ways, this is what could happen.
Yeah, and we're all going to be judged for our sins.
More. I was thinking more than that. Just if we carry on, we'll destroy ourselves and destroy the planet. Unless we respect nature, respect the world, respect each other. And I think that's interesting. How that does crop up in the past.
Yes.
A warning to humanity. If you think about it, and it's happened quite a lot historically.
And if everyone had that belief, they'd have a better life, wouldn't they?
I think we might stop killing each other, and we might. I don't know.
Who knows?
Not us personally. Well, I've never never killed anyone.
Yeah, what was that film recently called Knowing with Nicolas Cage?
Yeah.
That's a classic thing where people begin to drop hints that it's coming to an end and they get all the children off. Things like that.
Yeah.
There's that whole idea that the world is in danger, and I can think of lots of 50s films like that. I mean, you're a bit more. They've remade one recently called The Day the Earth.
Classic.
A robot turns up and warns humanity that it's going to kill itself off.
And that was based on actual encounters people had with extraterrestrial beings. Who gave them these warnings, and
Things like the Mothman prophecies.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And you've got all sorts of things like that. So the idea of endings and cults using it, any knowledge can be used for good or ill.
That's right.
And the true understanding really depends on the most information the more information and awareness and understanding spread to the most possible number of people without concentrating secret wisdom in the hands of a few. I mean, of course, you know, looking at the rise of neo-paganism today, during the 16th century many innocent women were killed because the church feared the rise of women. The issues are where people get persecuted for being heretics, where knowledge is locked away, society is not whole. And that's a true ending of the world for many people. But we're still here. And we're here talking about these sorts of things.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, so, who killed the dinosaurs? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean,
some people believe it was an asteroid volcano.
yeah, I mean, it's looking at scientific evidence, it does seem as if we know there was a large object impacted the Earth approximately 70 million years ago in an area we now know is the area of Mexico, and you know there's a large crater, but apparently they don't you know, it's thought now that didn't lead to the annihilation of dinosaurs as species there and then. There's some evidence it was already happening for various reasons, because one problem in one sense the dinosaurs, their size as an advantage, in other ways it was a disadvantage, and so there's evidence they were dying out anyway before, and that sort of hastened their demise. Right. But I mean it didn't have, it took, apparently the death of the dinosaurs took place over a longer period than we imagine. And that's certainly, I mean, that that seems, very few people know. I mean, I don't know if anyone serious says, there wasn't a catastrophe that did lead to the demise of the dinosaurs. There are other factors as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Such as other creatures, the eggs being exposed, devouring their young.
Yeah.
There's evidence that quite a lot of that went on. So they couldn't repeat. And certainly, after the impact, say, of the asteroid, they couldn't replace the.
Well, that was like an end of the world in a sense, wasn't it? The dinosaurs ending.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then us being.
That's how you. That's exactly. I mean, that's how. Yeah, absolutely. That's how you would describe it. It was a profound change in what was the dominant species on the Earth. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, tell me about possible doomsday scenarios. Can you shed some light on that?
Well, doomsday scenarios, I mean, we're beginning to speculate that things like solar winds, our own effects of damaging the planet could well add to that. Massive tsunamis where are caused by volcanic shifting, the complete melting of the polar ice caps. All these are scenarios. The idea of nuclear, well, you see, here we have, let's give you a prime example. We are told that the only future for the humanity is to go nuclear. We bury the waste, which is radioactive, for 250,000 years. And when we assess the cost of electricity produced by nuclear power, we don't happen to put in the cost of what it would be to decommission them. So the way we treat is a scenario as well. That also could actually have an effect, where you've got situations where we don't produce, the soil is not as rich as it is, and we don't get as many vitamins and nutrients that we need. So the ability for humanity to reproduce gets less. Doomsday scenarios usually depend on what we know of science at a particular time. There are numerous scenarios that could occur, but there is also, if we can get off this planet, humanity will survive. Because the amount of knowledge we've got at the moment, which is stored, means that the information we would have left behind would allow however few survivors to keep that knowledge. So we might actually be the only species that has that potential to survive and pass our culture on to whoever does survive. So perhaps the doomsday scenario would mean 97-98% of humanity disappearing, but there is always that chance a small percentage will survive.
But that's why we are exploring Mars, and there's
Yes.
another probe going there to land on the planet in a few years' time, and because this isn't science fiction. Well, it started off as science fiction, but there are discussions about possibly colonising Mars in the future. So that as Ray Bradbury, I think, said in the book, The Martian Chronicles, that we would then become the Martians.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those are serious discussions taking place. I mean, it's one because as we, as the human population grows, and obviously there's more strain on resources, and there's other, and there could be a natural disaster, such as a comet or volcanic explosions, that some portion of humanity that survived might in the future need to escape the planet, if possible, and colonise a nearby planet. And that those discussions are actually taking place. That's not, it was science fiction, and now it's science fact.
Okay, can we prevent these disasters from happening? Can we stop them?
I think we can. I mean, in terms of, for instance, nuclear holocaust, obviously, have various international agreements and controls that every nation abides by, and try and limit the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and other major wars breaking out in terms of exploitation of the environment, try and develop a sustainable economy, which obviously is easier for us to do in the more affluent West than it is in the developing world. But some things, I mean, natural catastrophes such as a supervolcano exploding, we couldn't really prevent that.
No.
I mean, there's speculation that if an asteroid or comet approached the Earth, we could use nuclear weapons to disable it. And again, those discussions have taken place.
Yeah.
Whether that would work or not, I don't know. Depends, because although I think NASA and other bodies they track the movements of comets, and there's one predicted to come very close to the Earth, I think in 2028. But some can literally appear out of nowhere. There would not be enough warning really for us to do very much. But we're lucky in a way that we've got a massive, we've got the moon, we've also got a massive planet in galaxy terms that's on a doorstep, and that's Jupiter.
Yes.
I mean, if everyone knows about the was it the Levy Shoemaker?
The Levy
Yes.
Shoemaker?
Yes.
I think eight objects struck Jupiter.
Yes.
Massive objects, but look quite small in comparison to Jupiter. I think if they had hit the Earth instead, we wouldn't be here.
Yes.
We'd have wiped virtually all life on Earth out. So
Yes.
that is something which is very difficult,
Yes.
difficult for us to prevent.
Because there have been times in the past where only that survived on Earth during some have been bacteria.
Yeah.
So life is a gamble, but we are at a critical moment. That's the point.
Okay, well, moving on, we're going to talk about phone calls from the dead now. And I've got I've got 3 stories I'm going to read out to you here now, to the audiences at home. Okay, the first one is set in 1969. Okay, now it involves a New Jersey rock musician named Carl Upoff. Now, he received a phone call from his grandmother. Nothing unusual about that, you might think, but Carl's gran had passed away 2 days earlier. Carl was 18 at the time of the phantom call, and there'd always been a special bond between him and his gran, who was deaf. She used to phone up Carl's friends and ask, "Is Carl there?" But because she knew she wouldn't be able to hear the reply, Carl's gran would then say, "Tell him to come home at once." Carl's friends were always irritated by the deaf old woman's constant calling, and used to tell Carl he shouldn't have given his gran their phone number. Okay? Be better in 1 second. This does continue. Right, so one day Carl's gran passed away, and the teenager was naturally upset. but he had no leanings towards spiritualism and obviously never expected to hear from his gran ever again. But Carl was wrong. One evening in 1969, Carl was with his friends in the basement of an apartment in Montclair, New Jersey, when the mother of his friend came down and said that Carl was wanted on the phone. When Carl went upstairs, he talked to the old woman and realised he was talking to his gran, who had recently died. Now, before he could ask her how she could talk to him when she was dead, the woman hung up. Many more calls followed, but on each occasion, when Carl's gran was asked how she was still able to communicate, or was what the other side was like, the old woman would hang up. In the end, the call stopped, but Carl felt that his gran was still watching over him. Okay, that's the first one. Now there's another chilling phone call from beyond the grave, allegedly occurred in Wilmslow, Cheshire in 1977, when a young woman named Mary Meredith received a call at her home from her cousin Shirley in Manchester. Mary shuddered when she heard Shirley's voice on what sounded like a bad line, because only minutes before, Mary had received a telephone call from her aunt telling her of Shirley's tragic death in a car crash just an hour ago. Again, before the phantom caller could be questioned, she hung up. Okay, now the last one is more recent. It's set in 1995. A radio station in Liverpool, England, featured a medium named James Byrne, who came on a phone-in show each week. Mr. Byrne was a psychic who claimed he could convey messages from the next world, and was a very popular guest. In fact, he was so popular, callers would jam the switchboard at the station whenever he was on air. One woman named Mrs. Wilson of Elmsmere, Port, rang the radio station, desperate to get in touch with James Byrne, because her grandfather had died a year ago, and she wanted to know if he had any messages for her. Unfortunately, Mrs. Wilson couldn't get through to the medium because the lines were jammed solid, and so she just sat back and listened to Mr. Byrne on the radio show. Around 10 o'clock that night, just as the News at 10 news programme was starting, Mrs. Wilson's phone rang. The woman answered the call, and a familiar but distant sounding voice said, "Look, love, I'm alright. It's great over here. I'm with your grandmother and all the other nice people who have passed on." Okay, so what do you think about that?
I think, I mean, obviously it's an area of the paranormal which isn't perhaps as widely documented as other aspects, say, such as ghost sightings or UFOs, but it is something which deserves a lot of attention, I think, and is getting more attention. But most people aren't aware, for instance, of this topic. And there have been a number of recorded instances of phone calls from the dead, which will go into more detail about different types of calls, the nature of the calls, who the calls are to, and so on. And only two serious books have been written about the subject. One was written in 1979 by two American parapsychologists called Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless. And then this year there was a sort of an updated version of that book done by a British, I think he's a British parapsychologist called Callum Cooper. And those are the only two, serious bits of documented research on the subject that have been produced in book form. But I think, I mean, in the books, the first book and in the more recent book, they look at, some excellent historical cases of the type you've talked about here. And they then submitted them to independent parapsychologists to examine the evidence and reach certain conclusions. The conclusions were largely positive that this phenomenon had taken place, and there was some unexplainable phenomena taking place here. The arguments have been about what is the nature of that phenomena. I mean, how would a spirit, is there something about telephone technology that a spirit can in some way manipulate? You go into whole areas there involving poltergeists and other aspects of the paranormal. both of those books are really worth having a look at because the cases they give are very well documented and authenticated, and you know, this the phone calls, and it's not a new phenomenon. It's just been only documented in the last 30 or 40 years. There's evidence that the first phone call from the dead took place in 1925.
Okay. Yeah.
And also, without going off on a tangent, people like Thomas Edison and Marconi and Nikola Tesla encountered this phenomena in an early form.
Okay, Martin, do you believe that ghosts and car people using phones or electronic devices, think that's possible?
Well, let's put it like this. As Lily said, there's been very fascinating documented evidence there. According to Carl Jung, we share something called the collective unconscious, which is, if you like, call it a quantum layer of information. It is possible that both the living and the dead can communicate using that. And the whole idea of the communication with the dead varied as if you like, the development of spiritualism occurred from mediums, people who could pick up frequency, through to modern communication. In fact, a lot of modern psychics believe that we've been gradually evolving over the last 40 or 50 years from more mediumship to mediation, where there are receivers, and that you're effectively having a conversation. So it would seem to me logically from that sort of point that there would be no reason why you couldn't have an email technically, or even talk on Messenger.
On that point, I mean,
And I'm sure Lee knows a little bit more about it than me, but I don't know anything about that. Is there any stuff on that, Lee?
there is. I mean, the interesting about telephone calls from the dead, I mean, the nature of, say, telephones have changed. We used to use copper wires, you know, to send telephone messages, and obviously it's on fibre optics now, you know, and this still goes on. There have been text messages allegedly from dead people. Of course, these things are easier to fake now, but I mean, text messages that can't be traced, can't be sourced. People have received them. People have received text messages from people who've recently died, or text messages from people who were dead, but the people who received them did not know they were dead. And that still happens. That's happened quite a lot with phone calls from the dead historically. But regarding emails and computers, I mean, there's one amazing case where, and this is going back a bit, but this is one of the most well-researched cases of its kind, and it took place in Britain in the mid-1980s. And computers were much more cumbersome then. They're very basic. They were just word processors, really. There was no internet or anything then. But what happened was, there were this family, and they noticed that these messages began to appear on their home PC in very old-fashioned language, and they researched this language, and they found it was the type of English people would have spoken in the 16th century. And these messages would appear and describing the world at the time, but obviously for people in the 16th century the world was their village. And about 250 of these messages appeared, and the person gave a name and, you know, said who the monarch was at the time. And obviously there was no internet. Also, let me explain, this happened on different computers. They bring in different computers they could get hold of, and the same messages would still appear. And they did the research, and they found this person actually existed in the 16th century. Now, obviously that's very difficult to explain. And there's a book on this subject called The Vertical Plane, I think by Ken Webster, if people want to look it up. I think it's available on Amazon if you want to read about it more. And I mean, one possible explanation for that, which I think is a possibility, and this does tie in with phone calls from the dead, is poltergeist activity. It's one possibility, but that's just my view. But in terms of what you're saying, modern technology is also affected by this phenomenon.
I mean, if you look at articles in Fortean Times that talk about computers switching themselves on that's not connected, and the Catholic Church has been called in several times to exorcise computers which will allegedly have been possessed. So if all this depends on frequency, tuning in, then there is no reason why modern technology cannot be accessible. to those who are passed on, why this information can be seen in different ways. I mean, and there are cases where great emotional need have actually influenced communication devices, where you're desperate to get hold of somebody, you're just thinking of them, and they ring. Or you accidentally push a number and they're there. Or you accidentally bump into somebody when you... So these are all part of a growing situation, which is challenging the idea that the world is as conventional as it seems. So they're all fascinating. And, you know, it makes you wonder, sort of, as other forms of technology develop and computers become more sophisticated, what would be possible?
So do you think we should be wary about receiving calls, you know, from members of family?
Yeah, I mean...
sorry, I don't
no,
apologise.
that's okay, yeah. I mean, there are a number of certain types of calls. I think researchers have found that certainly it's not unusual to receive a call from a relative who has passed away recently, or may have passed away and the person receiving the call is unaware that person has recently died. A number of cases where people say, you know, it's been a parent and then they found out subsequently the parent was recently passed away. You know, that seems to be quite common. There's a link there, certainly. One argument put forward by people is that psychokinesis taking place there. It's people are although I think the fact when people don't know their relatives passed away, it tends to undermine this argument. One argument is where people know is that they're very emotional, and when you're in an emotional state, it seems to affect your psychic capacity in some way.
Yeah.
And one argument is that they then somehow make the telephone line ring, and you know have this conversation with their dead relative. One interesting thing is sometimes when, I mean, it's only in recent years, for instance, on landlines, you can now dial and see where a call has come from. And when sometimes people have received calls from relatives who've passed away, they know they've passed away, and they've. Is it still 1471 you dialed?
Yes.
Because I haven't got a landline. It's their own number comes up, so the call has come from their own phone.
Yes.
But even if people are, you know, a factor in this is people's emotional state making that phone ring. That's still pretty profound.
Yeah, I mean, I can think.
But I don't think that's.
I can think of an interesting case. I dealt with this 20 years ago. There were two elderly guys who were in a relationship. They were, and obviously at that time, gay relationships were frowned on. So was one, the one who was dying could not be the one who was with him.
Yeah.
Now, at that precise moment as he died, he had a phone call from this character saying, "I'll be all right."
Yeah.
That's illustrating, and that's a case that I have no reason to doubt. People were perfectly, the guy was perfectly sensible, well balanced, and you know, modern technology offers so much more for research.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
And the case you give there, again, that message, you know, that people will often receive from a loved one does seem, you know, to come up quite a lot, where there's an emotional link. But there are others recorded instances where, you know, there isn't an emotional link.
Yes.
And these calls, you know, still come through. People, I mean, another common feature, and this isn't widely known, is where people are not actually dead, but people receive a call, or they'll ring someone and have an ordinary conversation with that person, who isn't dead, incidentally, and when they speak to that person will deny any knowledge of it. It hasn't, you know, so whoever they were talking to, it wasn't that person. Rather, like sometimes people will see you. It's happened to me. People have said, "I saw you," and you know you were not there. You know, I think personally that's something to do with poltergeist phenomena myself. For instance, there's a well-known, in terms of possible capacity of poltergeist to affect telephones. There's a well-known case of poltergeist activity in Bavaria in the late 1960s, a well-documented case. I forget the name of the German town, but it's a very well-documented case. And one of the things, as well as turning off lights and turning the photocopiers on and all other kinds of things that poltergeists do, it used to, from the office phones, it would ring a speaking clock.
Oh, that's okay.
So it could manipulate that telephone technology.
Yeah.
You know, so I think this phenomena, it's people are not always even dead, and there's still something interesting taking place.
Okay. And now I know you've got a very interesting story to tell us as well. Well, prior to the show, you said you had a dream. Tell us about that.
The dream, or the
Or you thought you saw something which was...
I think I had it.
It
Well,
was like
I'll
an
talk
illusion.
about. Well, shall we talk? If I say a bit about the phone call, perhaps. Can I talk about that?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
talked about that. Sorry if I confused you earlier.
Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, I was where I worked on one occasion. I was in the building on my own, and it was a type of building that had sort of an internal telecommunication system that wasn't accessible from outside the building, and it was only known. The only people who would know how to use this were people who had worked at that, or were working at the property, or had worked. But as I say, I was in this property by myself, and I was in the office. There was another person there, and this internal telephone system, there was a call, which I thought was odd, because I was the only person in the building. I know this because it took place at night, and at night there was only one person on duty in this place, and there was a voice, and it started to ask for certain people who weren't there, wouldn't be there at that time, which I thought was strange, and I thought the voice sounded familiar, and then this voice, and the voice sounded a bit far away. That's something I want to say, because one aspect of this phenomena is when people receive calls from people they know are dead, they do often sound, they can either sound a bit mechanical, or they can sound far away, distant. So it sounded like a bad line, or far away, and the voice said, he'd asked for these people, they weren't there, and then he said to me, I know your brother, and I knew, because my brother also worked for the same company, and I also knew your father and your uncle. They passed away, and then I recognised the voice, and and this might sound quite dramatic, but it was the voice of someone who I had worked with and had passed away a year before, and that was all this person said. His name was John, and unfortunately, during the call, I didn't, because I was so astounded, really, because like a lot of paranormal phenomena, there's often no warning this takes place. You're going about your daily life as normal, you're making a cup of tea, you're watching the telly, you're talking to your girlfriend or your partner, whatever, or playing with your children or something, and then these things happen. But it was the voice of this person called John, who I know had passed away a year before, and that's an experience I've had, and I know it happened. I'd always had an interest in this phenomenon before then. So when the books I referred to earlier, I remember reading many years ago in a second-hand bookshop. It's very hard to get now. The first phone call from the Dead book in 1979. But I think that's the experience, perhaps, which is relevant to this discussion.
Okay. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just to say, I think when we, and this is a vast subject, it intrudes into lots of areas of the paranormal. For instance, it overlaps with EVP in some ways.
Yes, yeah.
Because obviously you know about EVP and the ways of detecting and picking up, voices of the deceased, and I mean, there've been machines developed, such as the Spiricom, which means spirit communications, and that was a machine developed in the 1950s. It wasn't a telephone, but it was a machine devised that allowed the manufacturers, two parapsychologists, allowed them to communicate with the dead, and there are recordings of their communication with dead people, and they're available on YouTube if people want to listen to them. One of the researchers was called, I think, George Meek, and you can listen to them for yourself. And there was also another machine manufactured then called the Vidicom, which involved a more recent. I mean, what's interesting is that as technology develops, it seems as if there are new ways possibly communicating with the dead. I mean, we've had telephones. then tape recorders,
Yes.
and then the Vidicom, and that was basically where people would set up a television without an aerial, and they'd turn the TV on, obviously, and it would just be white noise or whatever. It wouldn't be anything, any channels.
Yeah.
And they'd stick a camera in front of it and they'd either record. And on times they found there'd be blurry figures and voices, yeah, which could have been some television channel, I understand that. But again, there were recordings which seemed to show that these were...
Yeah, I mean a particular
entities of some kind.
a particular experience I had years ago was when my practice was starting out some 25 years ago. I was using my mother's old house to see clients, and I did an experiment with an old tape recorder where I just recorded. There was no microphone in. I just left the tape running to produce white noise, and I played it back, and I heard my grandmother's voice. It was the room I was using was the room that she used to be in. So that's the sort of thing. I mean, if you could look back at things like the Ouija board is a means of communication, originally, for that sort of thing. So, you would expect in an eternal realm where beings were surviving, they would be quite aware and able to use the communications that we have.
One experiment people apparently can try, you need a landline for this, is you take the phone off the hook, and obviously it'll make it depends. Someone just give out this message, the phone's off the hook or whatever, but apparently if you leave it and leave a microphone that's recording there for some time, that you can also detect voices from the dead. That's something people can try themselves. I haven't tried it myself, but
Guess we'll have to try that then, won't we?
But I think it's interesting just to emphasise that despite the change in technology, say with telephones, different cables being used, new technology now, this is still happening.
Yeah.
It seems as if those that have passed on are able to find ways of trying to reach us. It does, that's the interesting thing about all this technology, early radio technology. Marconi would come across voice, there'd be recordings of voices he couldn't explain. Nikola Tesla. Thomas Edison, in fact, was convinced that Tesla had invented a machine that could contact the dead. And he was in competition with Tesla to try and create this machine himself. And he wasn't able to before he died. Now, serious people like Edison were interested in this, and Marconi, and Tesla, who was an amazing individual I urge everyone to find out more about. And when Tesla died, all his papers, I think, were seized by the American government or something, because of the things that were contained in his papers. If people like that were interested in this phenomenon, then obviously there must be something worth looking into.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, well, thanks very much, both, for coming on the show. As always, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Martin.
It's been a pleasure. It's been great.
It's been fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's all we got time for today, guys, but thanks very much for tuning in. Tune in next week for next week's Christmas special, and we'll see you then. Thanks very much.